Hi, this is Matt Ratto, and welcome to the first video lecture for INF2300 Biodesign, Emerging Technologies, and Social Impact. This is really an attempt of mine to use a series of kind of open technologies to provide these lectures. So I'm using Hangouts on Air and broadcasting to YouTube as a way of generating these videos, and hopefully this will work appropriately for the goals of the class. Since this is a public video, if you're kind of coming across this just in passing, I am going to provide a little bit of introduction to what we're up to here in the class and in this lecture series. And I'm going to follow that up with more specific guidance for class members on how to generate this strategic focus assignment that I want you to complete this week as preparatory for the rest of the material that we're going to deal with in the class. So I'm going to just go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to be using some slides. So I'll go back and forth between this video feed and a shared screen in my browser here. So let me get that set up. Okay, so hopefully I'm in the right screen here, and you're looking at a title slide about the class. I will note here again about my office hours on Wednesdays from 12 to 2, the location of my office as well, which I should note is in the Robarts Library building, and also my email address, mattratto@utoronto.ca. You can always send me an email if you have any questions. So again, this week I'm going to do a brief introduction of the biodesign material, just so people know what we're up to in case they come across this video. I'm going to go through needs finding and selection briefly. And really what we're going to be talking about today here is the first part of that process, which is the development of a strategic focus. For those of you who don't know what we're up to, this is, again, INF2300, and it's really a course providing a multidisciplinary team-based approach to the identification of needs, development of ideas, and the potential integration of information technology solutions within biomedical contexts. We're going to be going through this process, the biodesign process created at Stanford, and exploring that in relationship and with the support of a series of practitioners that will be acting as external advisors to the class. So let's kind of jump on in. And these video lectures will be available weekly at criticalmaking.com/biodesign, and they'll be being posted to YouTube, and they'll supplement the rest of the material in the class. So first, just as a reminder, biodesign was developed at Stanford, is focused on medical device development, and incorporates a rather substantial amount of the work on implementation, specifically focused often on market sustainability. There's a website that is kind of supplementary to the textbook, which is also available. That website is ebiodesign.org. The biodesign process basically goes through a series of steps. You can see them detailed there on the screen: needs finding, screening, concept generation, concept screening, strategy development, and business planning. Through the course, we're really going to be focusing on needs and concepts. We're not going to be getting into the rest of this, though we might talk a little bit about it. And today, and for the next couple of weeks, we're really focusing on needs finding, in other words, problem discovery, which is setting out what those problems and needs are that will then ideate solutions to later in the class. I want to start, though, by restating this great quote from the textbook itself, something that I've heard a number of people say in the areas of technological innovation, which is simply this: that an idea really has no importance whatsoever. It's the implementation and its acceptance by others that brings benefit to patients. And in this case, talking specifically about medical and biomedical intervention. I've also heard this stated as the idea has no value, which is such a strong statement when we're used to thinking that, in fact, ideas and idea has a kind of a property characteristic to it that allows for economic generation, and that all you really need to do is, if you have a good enough idea, the rest of it kind of devolves from that. In fact, what I've found in my career and what I've found in observing innovation practices across a range of fields is that ideas are easy to come by, but it's matching those ideas to real change, real impact, and putting the time and energy into actually implementing ideas, which is where the real value lies, and of course also where the real difficulty lies. It's relatively easy to have ideas. It's relatively difficult to implement them. And biodesign is really set out to help with both sides of that process, both the idea generation in terms of generating good ideas, but also in thinking through how that implementation cycle takes place. And I think you're going to see that through the class, that the biodesign process provides some resources and ways of thinking and methodologies that are very appropriate to the biomedical context, but are equally appropriate to other design contexts as well in other fields of work, that ultimately identifying needs, creating solutions to those needs, and figuring out ways to implement those is what design is all about. The other key aspect, I think, of this text, this kind of starting assumption of this text, and that I share as well, is the idea that innovation and creativity really is a process and a skill, not something that's just inherent to certain lucky individuals. That, in fact, everybody can innovate and everybody can be creative given the right skills and resources and tools to do so. So I want to start this class also with that assumption that we are all creative, we are all innovators, and that learning to innovate and learning to be creative is what we're up to in this class. To return to biodesign, and this textbook that we're referencing and using in this class really focuses on 3 different stages of the overall innovation process. It talks about identification, invention, and implementation. For identification, it's really about identifying unmet medical needs. For biodesign, it does focus quite heavily on identifying unmet needs where there is a commercial viability, where the satisfaction of that need and the resolution of any problems associated with it will result in a kind of a marketable solution. We're going to talk about that through this course. As you note, the course title is really about social impact, and what I want to just kind of suggest here at the beginning of the course is that market or commercial viability is only one mechanism by which one can implement ideas in order to have social impact. And I want to talk more about that as we go, and in fact share some examples from my own experience with nonprofit technological innovation as an alternative to standard commercial viability and market processes. But identification is certainly the starting point, and that's where we're going to start. And the second is invention. How do you develop a solution? Now, we're going to focus on a specific range of technologies and provide technological boot camps on these technologies during the course to hopefully kind of structure this process a little bit more. But we'll certainly be doing that as the class proceeds. And then the idea of implementation. How do you then transform an idea and a prototype into a product, into something that can actually scale, be sustainable, and can be deployed into the real world. This class will focus primarily on identification and invention, but we will certainly talk about implementation, and as I just noted, implementation not just in terms of standard market mechanisms, but using other forms of sustainable means for creating and sustaining biomedical interventions. If you're following along in the textbook, figure P2 on, I can't remember the page number, but one of those pages lays out the entire process. And today what we're going to be, or for the next couple of weeks, what we'll be focusing on is this strategic focus and observation and problem identification, with the lecture today really talking about 1.1 strategic focus and giving you a bit of an overview of that. Ultimately, the process that we're going to be carrying out in the first couple of weeks of the class is really about moving from observation to defining problems to really characterizing those problems as the needs of particular individuals, both clinicians on one hand and patients on the other. So observation by itself provides the background resources. The development of a problem statement, which is what I'll talk about next week, is really the key kind of movement where you're taking what you've seen and turning it into something that you can utilize as part of an ideation process. And then to need, which is of course, many needs typically devolve from one problem. And so moving to specific needs is also a way of getting more focused in a way that makes ideation, concept generation more possible. Today, we're really going to start with defining a strategic focus. And I want to really talk very pragmatically about how you can go about doing this. And I want to break that up into really two different pieces. On one hand, I think the start to developing a strategic focus is really taking a personal inventory, each individual member of a team, thinking, spending some time and thinking about what excites you, what are your interests. Do you have personal experiences really that are of your own experiences with healthcare, or experiences that you witnessed with family members that are somehow relevant, that highlight areas that you might want to think about or focus on? Part of those resources you might draw upon is why did you take this class, or why are you watching this video? What about this area is of interest to you that makes you want to carry out some kind of work? And then another thing to think through is, what are your personal capacities and competencies? If you're somebody with technical skills, what are those skills? If you're somebody with management or business experiences, what are those capacities? And if you're somebody who's really a kind of a critical thinker, or a good reader, or a good evaluator of written or other forms of material, what can you share? What can you bring to bear on this kind of problem space? So this is really a very personal process. I encourage you to spend a half hour, 45 minutes or so, really doing this and taking some notes on that as a start to defining your strategic focus. And every member of the team should carry out this kind of personal inventory, thinking in some sustained ways about this before moving on to the next part of defining a strategic focus, which is really taking a team inventory. So with those personal inventories behind you, kind of with these notes or other materials that you've generated through that, then meet as a team. You can do it online, you can do it in person. Discuss the answers that you had individually to these personal questions, and look for overlap, look for continuity or discontinuities between team members. What interests, ideas, or goals do you share? What is the fit between team expertise and team goals? And you might note at this point that I haven't said anything at all specifically about the biomedical context, other than to say about personal experiences in relationship to it. Lots of different experiences and lots of different personal and joint resources and goals are relevant in this context. Are you interested in social justice? Are you interested in equality? Are you interested in expertise, or in citizen kinds of notions? Are you interested in power relations, and in transforming those? A lot of what we're seeing specifically in biomedical context is really the movement and changing nature of medical expertise, or these things that are of interest to you, either individually or as a team. Have a broad discussion about this. You don't need to draw right at this point entirely upon medical expertise. Really think personally and in a smaller joint community group around these thoughts, and figure out what is the fit between what you want and are interested in as individuals, and what you can work for and work together towards as a team. So once you've done a little bit of that personal and a little bit of that team inventory, then start thinking about goals. Now, thinking about goals, I want you to remember some caveats. First, remember that you should be focused on near-term outcomes. So your goals as a team should not necessarily be to transform the biomedical industry in some kind of a way. Keep them relatively focused, and we of course can talk about this either jointly as a group or with me individually. And remember, it's a 13-week course, so this is really a tryout of biodesign methods and techniques, and so feel free to be exploratory and be broad, but make sure that you're not over-emphasizing and overstating what you're capable of as a team within a 13-week period. Some help to think about in terms of defining a strategic focus is to develop some acceptance criteria. What kind of criteria do you want to think about in defining what your focus is? Many, I should note again, that within this acceptance criteria, which is figure 113 from the Biodesign book, remember that on market growth and market dynamics and competition and revenue as a kind of a key aspect of the biodesign process, but bracket that off for now and think a little bit more about fit with your mission and your capabilities. Think about what kind of effects you might want to have. Think about the time required to achieve results, and remember that that this is a relatively short course. Think about the resources you might need to achieve results, and think about the customers that might need to be cultivated, customers, patients, clients, whatever term works for you. But this is really a moment, this acceptance criteria is really a moment where you can think about what kind of requirements might you utilize for defining what projects are relevant to you and your team. And in particular, think about what kinds of things would you reject. You know, don't just think about your acceptance criteria, but also think a little bit about your rejection criteria in terms of what your strategic focus or goals might be. This is all really towards brainstorming a little bit about beginning to shape the kind of project that you're going to accomplish during this class. And again, this is something that we can discuss either in some of our scheduled in-person classes, or I can discuss in this format, lecture format, or online in our class forums. Now, what I want you to do really in terms of writing up an initial strategic focus is to really leverage your personal reflections and group reflections, group meeting. And as the textbook describes, you really should also encompass advice from advisors. But I'm going to ask you to wait on this until you have a chance to really make contact with the advisors for this class. So you're not going to necessarily have the full set of details that you might need for truly defining a strategic focus, in particular in terms of the medical areas in which you might want to focus. I still think that you can come up with some interim ideas and interim thoughts that you can write up for this first assignment, and of course you can revise these as the course progresses. Specifically, what I'd like you to try to do and to post on the course website, and you should do this obviously as a team, is 1 to 2 sentences describing your team focus and goal, 1 to 2 sentences that inventory the capacities and interests of team members, and specifically how those match to the focus or goals that you think are accomplishable. And then 1 or 2 sentences describing how your team reached this focus, including some description of this acceptance criteria that you utilized for deciding upon these goals and this focus. So this is really just a kind of a broad, rough statement about strategic focus for your team. And I'd like you again to post that to the course website along with very short bios of each team member. And this is really both to help us as a class start thinking about each other's work and really as a kind of a jumping off point for the technical work that you'll be doing in the class, as well as the conceptual and theoretic work that you'll be doing in thinking through ideas of biodesign, emerging technologies, and social impact. Again, I'd like you to have that done before class on Thursday, which is 10 to 12. This week, it's in 10 to 12 in Bissell 520. And the reason that we're meeting in person this week is both to, I think it's good for us to meet now in the beginning part of the class to talk about any issues that are coming up, but also because we're having a tech boot camp on medical imaging and 3D model generation in this period of time. So come if you, every team is going to need at least one laptop, but I encourage every team member to bring a laptop. You'll be installing some basic image segmentation software, running some modeling activities, and we'll be talking about how medical imaging and 3D models are being utilized in a range of biomedical contexts, including things like surgical training and planning. I will also briefly discuss in the class how we're going to kick off this interview process with your advisors, and I'll follow that up with some more material about potential interview questions that you might want to ask them. Again, you can always contact me at matt.ratto@utoronto.ca in person during the office hours I mentioned at the beginning of this brief lecture, or through the Blackboard forums. I really prefer email. I think that's probably a bit of a better way to go. I very much look forward to seeing you in class on this Thursday, and I hope this lecture was useful for you. Have a great rest of your early part of the week, and I'll see you on Thursday. Bye.